You know, we usually think of history as, well, stuck in the past. But what happens when physical walls leave invisible scars long after the actual concrete is smashed to pieces? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the source material on Germany's phantom border to figure out exactly how deep ideological wounds can evolve into permanent economic divides. It's a fascinating look at the data, so let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, a war of annihilation. Second, drawing the Iron Curtain. Third, the lethal architecture. And finally, the phantom economic border.
Okay, Part 1. A War of Annihilation. To really understand the division of Germany, we've got to trace things back to the staggering devastation of the Eastern Front. Historian Jeff Rutherford hits the nail on the head here. He describes it as immeasurable brutality, where the traditional norms of war were simply ignored in pursuit of victory. So we aren't talking about a standard military conflict. This was an existential clash that treated human life as entirely expendable.
2 million. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the estimated number of casualties, both military and civilian, from the Battle of Stalingrad alone, fought over just a few short months. It's a number so massive, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, right? But it really highlights the sheer scale of the bloodletting that scarred this entire region.
And these cataclysmic swings completely fractured Germany. Look at the timeline. In 1941, you have the initial German invasion, Operation Barbarossa. Then, the brutal urban combat of Stalingrad in 42 and 43 shifts the momentum permanently. Finally, by 1944, the massive Soviet offensive, Operation Barbarossa, hands Germany its largest military defeat in history.
The mindset driving all of this violence boils down to one terrifying concept: military necessity. Literally doing whatever it takes to win, completely regardless of ethics or past practices. This exact logic was used to justify the deliberate starvation of Soviet cities and the deaths of 3.3 million prisoners of war. This total erasure of morality, well, it essentially set the stage for the uncompromising borders that followed.
Moving on to Section 2, Drawing the Iron Curtain.
So, as the dust settled in 1945, the four Allied occupation zones coalesced by 1949 into a divided nation: West Germany and East Germany. But here's the crazy part. This 1,300-kilometer divide didn't start out as a massive concrete wall. It actually began as a porous green border, just woods and fields where people could, literally just walk right across.
But that porous border triggered a massive shift: 2.7 million. That's how many East Germans packed up their lives and fled to the West before 1961. Facing economic stagnation and political repression, nearly 20% of the East's entire population just left. For the East German government, this kind of brain drain was an absolute existential threat.
To stop the bleeding, the border was heavily fortified, and that resulted in two wildly different narratives. On one side, the East German government officially labeled it the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart, framing the wall as a vital shield against Western saboteurs. Meanwhile, West Germany dubbed it the Wall of Shame, arguing its only true purpose was to keep East German citizens imprisoned. Same physical boundary, completely opposite realities.
That brings us to Section 3, the lethal architecture.
Let's actually walk step by step through the intense hurdles a defector would have to survive just to reach the main fence. First, they'd enter a 5-kilometer restricted zone. You needed special permits just to be there. And to build it, over 13,000 homes were demolished and entire villages razed to the ground to depopulate the area. If they somehow made it through that, they'd hit the 500-meter protective strip. Every single tree, bush, and rock was removed from this area to eliminate any hiding spots. Finally, right before the barrier was a 10-meter control strip of bare, plowed earth. Its specific purpose? To reveal the footprints of absolutely anyone trying to cross. By the 1970s, all of this evolved into the modern frontier, and the technology used is honestly staggering. We're talking 3-meter-high steel mesh fences, electrified signal fences linked straight to alarms, 1.3 million landmines deployed in the ground. They even mounted SM-70 directional fragmentation mines directly onto the fences, rigged to trigger if someone just tried to climb over. It was a highly automated, genuinely terrifying machine.
But the hardware was really only half the equation here. You also had the Schießbefehl. This was the East German Standing Order authorizing border troops to use lethal force as a last resort to halt escape attempts. Soldiers were essentially given a shoot-to-kill mandate, and these brutal protocols resulted in hundreds of documented deaths along the border. The entire environment was engineered for containment at the absolute highest human cost.
All right, Section 4, the phantom economic border.
Now, we all know the story.
The physical wall fell in 1989, and that lethal architecture was finally dismantled. But fast forward to today, and the data reveals something pretty startling. Decades later, a phantom border remains clearly visible. The concrete is long gone, but this invisible economic divide is still shaping millions of lives.
Just look at the data on unemployment. In 2018, the unemployment rate in the former East sat at 6.9%, compared to 4.8% in the former West. Now, while it's true that the gap has narrowed since the 1990s, that old borderline is still starkly visible when you look at the modern economy.
And you see this exact same gap in everyday wealth. Looking at disposable after-tax income from 2017, citizens in the former East took home roughly 19,900 euros. Meanwhile, those in the former West cleared over 23,200 euros. That means, decades after reunification, people in the East still only earn about 86% of what their Western counterparts do. It's wild to think about.
So what's driving this? Well, the underlying issue here is a massive productivity gap. The East is only producing at about 75% the per capita rate of the West. Why? Mostly because of a huge lack of corporate headquarters. Get this, today, not a single East German company is listed on the DAX 30, which is Germany's leading stock exchange index. The economic engine of the country still tilts entirely to the West.
Because of these persistent gaps, the psychological divide really lives on. 74%. Nearly 3/4 of people living in the former East feel their living standards simply haven't caught up yet. It proves a pretty sobering point. Tearing down a physical wall might only take a few weeks, but rebuilding a truly unified reality, that takes generations.
Which leaves us with a provocative question. Can a border ever truly be erased? We've seen how the extremism of the 1940s built the lethal walls of the Cold War, and exactly how those walls left behind invisible economic scars that we still see today. It really makes you wonder about the borders being drawn in our world right now, and what phantom scars they might leave for generations to come. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.